Good afternoon, everyone. It's James Carpenter with Country Living. Today I would like to talk a little bit about the U.S. Army basic training. So a little bit of history. My grandfather was in the Army. My dad was in the Army. I had two brothers that were in the Army, and obviously myself, I was in the Army. So we're going to talk about January of 1973 is when I enlisted. So basically I went down to a place called Fort Hays in Columbus, Ohio. I got sworn in. I got put on a bus. Well, there was a group of us. And I remember somebody was passing out these little Bibles to all the guys getting on the bus. So I've still got that Bible to this day. So the bus drove us down to Fort Knox, Kentucky, and when the bus came to its final stop, these guys come in, started yelling and screaming at us, get out of here, go, and all this, and it was like, oh boy. So we got out of the bus, and they took us in a room, and they said, if anybody's got any drugs or weapons, put them on the table now. Obviously I didn't have any of that, so that wasn't a problem. There was a few of them had some knives and different things like that. From there we went through a line, and the guy distributing the uniforms must have been pretty good at just sizing people up by looking at them. Because as you went down the line, they just throwed you the uniforms. You stuffed them all in they call it a duffel bag. And then you got your first Army haircut, and that was basically they took all your hair off, left a little tiny bit like you needed to shave. And then they put us in a barracks, and we were there for probably 3 or 4 days. Just waiting around. I think we were waiting for a unit to be assigned to. And during that period, there was one guy, I remember I was looking out the second story window and a car pulled up, and this guy got in the car and left. So he was AWOL right off the bat, so to speak. So they had us take our duffel bags. I remember all that clothing, that duffel bag, it was pretty heavy. You throwed it up on your shoulder and you started walking, and they walked us down to where these old World War II wooden barracks were, and that's where we were going to be for the next 8 weeks. So I think I was on the first floor, and we occupied a few buildings, but basically once you got bunked down for the night, the next morning they came in yelling and screaming. So there was a lot of yelling and screaming going on, and they would have us get up, we had to take a shower, we had to get dressed, and then we had to fall out for formation. And once you fold out for formation, they marched you over to the mess hall. And you stood in line at what they call parade rest, and they took 5 people in at a time, and they gave you 3 minutes to eat your food, and they were yelling and screaming at you to get out. And I'll be quite honest with you, I've never been a fast eater. Somehow I got over, I think I went over 3 minutes quite a few times. And then the physical training would take place, the push-ups, the sit-ups, the monkey bars, all that kind of stuff. And then the big thing is they would load us up on, they called them cattle cars. And they probably were just a cattle car, but we loaded up into those, and they drove us out to the firing range. Well, first they trained us on weapons. They trained us on not only weapons, but first aid and all the other stuff that comes along being a soldier. Now, once we got out to the firing range, we'd shoot all day long, and then you had to march back. And they had two great big hills. One was called Misery and one was called Agony. And we would march up those hills, and every now and then a fellow would fall out, like he couldn't do it. I can't make it any further. Then they would tell him to start running circles around the people that were marching. So really they got themselves in a little bit deeper on that. As far as the training goes, a lot of time we were in class, we were learning what you need to be, what it takes to be a soldier, I guess. But they end up, what they do is they test you. They set up all these stations, and you go through and you do first aid, you do the gas mask, you do all this other stuff. Well, I had no idea what my score was or anything like that, but there was a handful of us at the end of the testing that got to ride home in the truck. The rest of them had to march. So basically I was one of those, and what that meant was that we scored very high on that testing. And then testing with the M16, it was winter, snowing a lot of times when we were out in the range, but when it come time to qualify, it was cold, a little bit of snow going on, different things like that. But anyhow, out of 205 soldiers, five of us scored high enough to be what they call sharpshooters, and there was one guy that actually scored expert, and the rest of them were bolos. A bolo means that, yeah, you can pull the trigger, but what you're going to hit is questionable. So I qualified as a sharpshooter, and there was 5 sharpshooters, that one expert. Well, that day we also got to ride home in the truck, and the rest of them had to march. And then the last test they do is your physical training, and you had to run the mile. And back in the 70s, you wore combat boots. You wore cotton fatigues, and you ran. So I ran the mile in 7 minutes and 13 seconds. I don't know if that's great. There's probably some athletes out there that would say, well, that's slow. But actually, it was pretty good because, again, I scored high enough that I got to ride home in a truck while the rest of them marched. One portion of the training was with the gas mask. So you had to go into a room. Your gas mask was in a pouch on your side, and they turned the gas on. The whole room started filling up with gas. And then the drill sergeant would say, put your mask on. So you had to put your mask on, and then you went like that, and you cleared the mask. Well, I got my mask on, and I got it cleared, and everything was good. But there was 5 of us in there at a time, and one guy, he was all over the place, choking, and they wouldn't let him out of there. He had to get that mask on and finally clear it before they let him out. So I imagine he went through some pretty troubled times right then. And you know, another thing about the military in the early 70s, the drill instructors were actually still allowed to do, I'm just going to tell it like it is. If they wanted to punch you, they could punch you. Luckily, I never got punched. I always try to do everything perfect, and it did pay off. Now, what else can I say about the basic training? It was pretty rigid. It it made a man out of you pretty quick. I grew a couple inches and put on about 25 pounds in those 8 weeks. I contribute that to the fact that I came from a large family and food was not in abundance. We got fed, trust me, but we couldn't overeat. It just wasn't happening. So after basic training, they send you out for advanced training. They call it AIT. And they sent me to Fort Gordon, Georgia to the MP school. And again, we were in World War II wooden barracks. And I distinctly remember the first time I went to the mess hall, I remember the cook saying, "How do you want your eggs?" And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, he's gonna fix them the way I want them? In basic training, you got whatever they flopped on your plate. But in AIT, it was a little more laxed, and it was just full of training. You're in classes all day long learning how to be an MP. But halfway through the MP school, they called out a half a dozen names, and I was one of them. And they said, you guys are going to be correctional specialists, which determined the Army as stockade guard. So they trained me at that point on to be a stockade guard. And I made it through 8 more weeks of training. And then they sent me back to Fort Knox for what they call permanent party. And at Fort Knox, there was a stockade. It was basically a prison. It had bars, it had all that. And we had a bunch of, the majority of them were draft dodgers. And they were locked up, military just locked them up. And then the president at the time, he decided that the draft dodgers could have amnesty. So they freed them all. Our inmate population went from 600 and some down to half a dozen or less. So they started reassigning the stockade guards. They had way too many guards and not enough inmates. And they assigned me to the U.S. Cavalry. Okay, that's a big change from being a stockade guard to being a cavalry soldier. Well, unfortunately, I didn't get any training from the military to be a infantry type soldier, but yet they threw me into that position and they transferred me to the 2nd of the 6th Cav at Fort Knox, Kentucky. And there, really all we did was train lieutenants on how to be officers. So I spent a lot of time just kind of out in this field. And when the lieutenants would come out there and train, we had grenade simulators, we had artillery simulators, we were carrying a sidearm of 45, but we didn't have any ammunition. And I just spent the whole day throwing hand grenades at tanks. And I did do one thing that was pretty cool. The tanks, when a tank runs across a hill too many times, it makes a ditch, kind of, because all these tanks keep going through there. And I knew exactly where that was, so here comes a tank with some fresh lieutenant in training. And I ran up there and I could literally step from there right onto the tank. And I had my 45 out and I put it up to his head and I said, "You're dead," you know. But, you know, like I said, we didn't have any ammunition. And that was probably the only time I did anything like that. But other than that, the grenade simulators would put firecrackers and M80s and all that stuff to shame. They were probably 2.5 to 3 inches. The grenade simulators were about this long and the artillery simulators were about this long. So you basically pulled the cap off of it, that ignited it, and then you threw it. Well, me being me, I brought a few of them home, brought them right up here into my local town, and I was over at a buddy's house. And I said, his name was Lee. I said, he lived in a really small town, but there were, you know, 8 or 10, 20 houses, I don't know, just a small town. I said, watch this, Lee. And I throwed one into like a shrub-like bush. It blew up, big cloud of smoke came out of there. And about half the people in town came out of their houses because they're wondering what the heck is going on. But I was young, 18-year-old kid. I was just having fun. And another little story of that type, we were on the hand grenade range. And they had us standing in line, and there was a guy issuing out hand grenades. And these were real hand grenades. And he gave me one, and I quickly throwed it into the bushes. And he says, I just gave you one. I said, no, I don't have one. So he gave me another grenade. And then I came out to that range later on my motorcycle. I had a little dirt bike. And I grabbed that grenade. And I thought, well, I came back home. You see, Fort Knox is only a 5-hour drive from where I live. So at the stockade, we worked 3 days first shift, 3 days second shift, 3 days third shift, and 3 days off. So on them 3 days off, I would jet home and be home for 3 days. So I took that hand grenade, and we're so far out in the country, especially back in them days, it was real country. I strapped the hand grenade to a bridge, and then I put fishing string around the pin, and I went down over the bridge more closer to the water, and I jerked that fishing string thinking it was going to pull the pin. And I don't know what I was thinking as a little kid like that. I thought I was going to blow the bridge up. It was a metal bridge. It would have never blew the bridge up, but it would have definitely made a loud boom. So I pulled that string, and that string got real tight, like a guitar string. And I was down there for probably 5 minutes or so trying to get up the nerve to peek up there and see what was going on. Well, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't stay under the bridge all day. So I did. I peeked up, and the pin was about halfway out of that hand grenade. So I felt a little bit safe at that point, and I walked up there and I grabbed the handle, and I got it loose from where I had it strapped, and I threw it in the creek. And the creek was up because it had been raining, so it was probably up 2 feet over its normal creek. It went in the water, it blew up, and it shot water probably 25 feet straight up in the air. And I thought that was pretty cool, but I really don't want you thinking that I'm crazy or anything like that. I just want to let you know that I was an 18-year-old kid, and kids will be kids. All right, that's enough of the Army war stories. I will close the video now. I appreciate you watching. If you enjoy my content, hit that like button. If you really like it, subscribe. I'd appreciate it. Thank you, and have a great evening.